Welcome to the U.S.-Ukraine Foundation. I welcome our guests here in the, I guess we can say in the audience, as well as those that are joining us via the internet, and also that those who will view this webcast at their own leisure at a later date. We are here to really discuss a very important topic, as we've just been sort of talking before our webcast, that has taken on a new level of importance and discussions of an event that took place so long ago. We are talking, the title of our presentation today is How the Holodomor Monument Integrates into the Monument Landscape of Washington, D.C. And we are privileged to have two very qualified experts to discuss this topic, and I will introduce one, Alla Rogers, and then she will introduce our other guest, Roger Lewis. Many of us, and many of you know Alla Rogers. She founded a gallery at Georgetown about 20 years ago and was really at the forefront, I think, of advancing our knowledge of art from Ukraine and other parts of the former Soviet Union. She's been at the vanguard of this focus. She's had hundreds of exhibitions and has led various artistic exchanges between American and Eastern European artists. She's an artist herself and has had numerous exhibitions. She has headed up several art associations. We could go on and on. Her full biography is on our website. She also had exhibits at the National Fine Art Museum of Ukraine. I think at the same time there was a Picasso exhibit, yes, if I recall. So that must have been fun. And she continues to be interested in bringing some understanding and depth of understanding to the world of Ukrainian art, as well as it's important here in the United States. So without further ado, I welcome Alla Rogers, and I will ask her to introduce our guest. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. I'm Alla Rogers, and it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague panelist this evening, Roger Lewis, who is a practicing architect and urban planner, a professor emeritus of architecture at the University of Maryland, College Park, and an author and a journalist. After earning his degree from MIT and working as an architect in the Peace Corps in Tunisia, Professor Lewis began teaching design at the University of Maryland School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation. Simultaneously, he launched a diversified, award-winning architecture and planning practice that's based in Washington, D.C., and since 1969, working with both private and public sector clients, he and his firm have designed multi-unit housing projects, schools, cultural and recreational facilities, and other civic and institutional buildings. Since 1984, the Washington Post has published his thematic illustrated column, Shaping the City, about architecture, planning, and urban development. His unique award-winning columns and illustrations have been published nationally and internationally, and his Shaping the City drawings have been widely disseminated and exhibited, including a one-man exhibit at the National Building Museum in 1999-2000. Since 2007, he has appeared regularly to discuss Shaping the City issues on the Kojo Namadi Show, broadcast by WAMU-FM, American University's National Public Radio affiliate in Washington, D.C. Professor Lewis serves on many design review committees and institutional boards. He's also a frequent design consultant in metropolitan Washington counties, municipalities, and government agencies. A trustee of the National Children's Museum, he chairs the museum's building committee overseeing design of a new 150,000 square foot museum at National Harbor in Prince George's County, Maryland. Since 1984, Roger Lewis has written numerous Washington Post Shaping the City columns about design of existing, proposed, and new memorials in Washington. Roger Lewis has participated in memorial design competitions, and his design concept was a finalist in the 1987 State of Maryland Vietnam Veterans Memorial. He has also served as a professor, advisor, and juror for the National Disabled Veterans Memorial in D.C. and for Maryland's World War II Memorial in Annapolis. Currently, Roger Lewis is a trustee of the Peace Corps Commemorative Foundation, seeking congressional legislation authorizing creation of a modest memorial near the center of Washington to commemorate the 1961 founding of the Peace Corps. It is my great pleasure to introduce Roger Lewis.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, just pull it a little closer. There we go.
Thank you for inviting me. I consider this an honor and privilege to address the subject, and I should tell everybody this is going to be very informal. We're not going to give lectures. We've exchanged a number of talking points, questions that we thought we would put on the table and try and answer, or not answer, but consider and discuss, and there may be some answers that emerge, and hopefully we'll get engaged with you all during this discussion. I don't know whether Ala, you have some thoughts as to where we ought to begin this. I should confess I'm probably the person in this room who's the least familiar with the history behind this commemorative. So would it be worth your saying a few words about what the concept for the commemorative is?
Certainly. The process for the designation of the land and all of that process that normally one could discuss, what is that process, and explore that has already occurred. And we are at the point, as the article explained, or tried to anyway, to explain that at this point organized and juried submissions were considered, and 5 finalists were chosen. And among those finalists, there's one American of Ukrainian descent and 4 Ukrainian nationals who are artists who submitted their projects. And in that final analysis, there will be several that are sort of left to be considered, all 5 really, and I think one of the issues we want to discuss is what are the elements that one would look for in a monument of this type that might be different than simply choosing a work of art. A monument has its own particular intention built into it, and perhaps we could start there.
Let me actually quote a couple of your questions, because I think your questions summarize what it is you've just said. This specifically, I'm reading now from Ala's talking points. The item 3, what messages and images make a public monument universally understood, and the emphasis here on universally, or I think the question that's raised is what makes something universally understood. Is there a general style or trend in the monument landscape of D.C.? I'm going to come back and talk about that. Are monuments in D.C. devoted to specific heroes or events? How many rely on symbolism? Which ones are the most powerful? And that's followed by point 5, monuments as vehicles for empathy and emotion. And then the question following that, which monuments in D.C. have these components, and how can the Holodomor monument contain information and feeling most effectively? Are these, strictly speaking, design elements, or are there intangibles? And when I read that, I immediately was inspired to think about some of the commemoratives that we all know very well in Washington, and how different they are, both in their design but also in their ability to produce feeling or emotions. For example, almost everyone that I've ever talked to or anything I've ever read, there seems to be great consensus that the Vietnam Memorial is thought to be one of the most powerful emotionally, which I couldn't say is the case for the Washington Monument, the obelisk. So we know there's some. I just mentioned that as an obvious contrast that might help this discussion move it along. The Lincoln Memorial, certainly standing, if you're in the right position and you see the statue of Lincoln sitting there and you read some of the inscriptions, or the Jefferson Memorial, they certainly are inspiring. But from 500 or 600 feet away, of course, the Lincoln Memorial simply becomes a knockoff of a classical temple. It doesn't have the same power that it does when you're up close to it. So, which immediately introduces the whole notion of how do you see these things? Where do you stand? We're facing this, in fact, with this, in starting to think about what the program for this Peace Corps commemorative should be, because what one thought is it should just be a place for contemplation with little message delivery versus a place where a story gets told. It seems to me that this is what some of your questions get at here. Is the Holodomor Memorial in Washington, given that there's a precedent for almost everything? I should add that my opinion is if you look around Washington, you can find a precedent for almost any direction you want to go in. So rather than trying to figure out what makes a Washington commemorative, I would say the question we need to address tonight is what is this memorial meant to convey? What is is it going to be primarily symbolic, an aesthetic intervention that doesn't necessarily have a narrative literally expressed, or should it be something where there is a story that someone from Iowa or California or London can stand and read and get the message? Maybe you should take this from here.
I feel that when I am in a community of Ukrainians and Ukrainian Americans, there is one set of sensibilities about this subject, because it is a subject that is so near to every single household, because literally every household was touched in some way by this terrible historic event. I know from my own childhood, listening to my parents and looking in family photo albums and seeing pictures of my mother in 1932 and 33, where she is plump with full cheeks and her parents look like they're about to wither away and expire, because it's obvious in the photograph that they've given her all the food in the hope that she will be the one to survive. And so there's this sensibility of how immediate and how emotional and how not abstract this whole subject is for Ukrainians and Ukrainian Americans who are hearing this one generation out from the actual events. So how to convey that feeling of involvement and emotion, and how to convey with respect and dignity without hitting the pity me button, to really and truly evoke the gravity of and the historicity and the weight of this event in visual language. And so I think this is a very challenging thing, and I believe there needs to be a narrative element in this design, because for me, I can look at things that are purely Ukrainian symbolisms and understand them and like them, and they resonate with me. But someone from Washington or someone from Iowa or someone from California may drive by and not get it at all, or actually even visit the space and not get it. And so I feel that we are, as a community, let's put it this way, compelled to at least communicate to the world and the artists who are involved to make that part of their mission, that the information must be somehow appropriately designed into the project so that people can easily access it, understand it, and feel something from it. And when I say without pushing the pity me button, I mean in the same kind of solemn gravitas that you feel when you approach the Vietnam Memorial, where just the overwhelming sea of names and the beauty of the material itself, and the fact that it just moves off into a distance from where you are in relationship to it, elicits some kind of deep wave of feeling in you. And that's what you want to go for, the deep response, not the cheap shot, so to speak. I feel like that deep response is appropriate to the event that this is memorializing.
It might be of interest to you all. Let me. I think that's a really important point. Some of you may know that the Vietnam Memorial, which is started out as just the wall with the names, has been repeatedly embellished. I use that word in quotations, by those who did not accept the notion of an abstract element in the landscape as a sufficient commemorative. So you know that eventually they added a sculpture of some soldiers, then a flag, and now they are planning to build an underground facility, a little museum. I don't know what to call it. One of the worst ideas that's come along. A clear case. I should now be a little political. This is a case where Congress just would refuse to say no to the veterans, but one of the most ridiculous ideas that's come down the pike is the notion of building an underground bunker next to the Vietnam Memorial in order to explain the Vietnam War, which is just a completely wrong-headed strategy. If anything, what we need is what they've done in London. They have an Imperial War Museum. If you want to find out about wars, you go to the museum and you can learn all of the history. They don't try and do all of that on site. But the Vietnam Memorial is a great case study because it has been, I won't say spoiled, but the power is getting diluted in a way by the desire of the veterans to add increasingly these elements that were not there in the beginning. Now let me mention the World War II Memorial in Maryland, which I was involved with. The commission, there was a commission of retired military people, mostly men, a couple of women, from WW2 who were making the decisions. And they decided that the World War II Memorial and for the state of Maryland needed to be didactics, needed to have information. So that commemorative, if you drive to Annapolis and you find the memorial, it's actually in a median of a highway approaching Annapolis. There you will find a map of the world that shows the Pacific Theater. There's some geography lessons. It shows the map of Europe, the map of the Pacific. There are a number of texts embedded in stone that if you walk around it, you can more or less get a kind of superficial synopsis of what happened in WW2. They wanted a commemorative where a kid, a 14-year-old, or for that matter, a 20-year-old, would come and learn something about World War II and the Marylanders who participated, so that it identifies all the different squadrons and regiments. I can't remember all of it. It was loaded with data. I thought it was overloaded. So that's the other extreme from the Vietnam memorial. These are kind of bookending the spectrum of possibilities for the commemorative that you're creating. When the Korean memorial was done, some of you may have seen that. That's the mirror image on the vis-a-vis the mall axis. That's the memorial on the south side. Some of you may have noticed that it's kind of Vietnam plus. It has a wall, but then it also has fountains, and it has sculptures of soldiers, and it has a number of elements. And I don't know, Larissa, whether you saw this. Years ago, Architectural Record asked me to write a critique of it, and I basically said, well, any one of these elements might be nice, but at some point they added slightly too many things. There's a lot going on there. It's a popular memorial, but that's another one where you could question the number of things that have been packed into that. And again, if you don't know the history of the Korean War, you're not going to get it at that commemorative. You might have to go read something. So anyway, I think you're as I read this article that Ala wrote, my sense was that really all the submissions are primarily symbolic and metaphoric. That although I suppose in any of them there might be some place where you would find a narrative or a few texts that, and maybe even a map of Ukraine, knowing that most Americans have no idea where Ukraine is located. So maybe we should talk a little bit about these designs. And as I understand it, we actually have images of them, right?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Roger. I'm going to show you some images up on the screen, and I would love to engage all of you in our discussion also, because there's a point at which I would love to hear from all of you. What is it that you feel that you want expressed, and what is it that you would want to feel or express when you went to visit a monument like this? You know, what is it that you hope to accomplish by going there?
I should add one other thing.
Yes.
I did intend to mention one other consideration, which is completely independent of the substance or content of what's being commemorated, and that is that this is also an urban space in a city. This is a part of the city of Washington. So there's an urban design dimension to this that I think is very consequential, which is to say that whatever is finally done should work with the cityscape. Should not be something that is perhaps inappropriate. An example of something that I've questioned very recently, some of you may have seen the proposed Eisenhower Memorial that Frank Gehry is designing. The first submission, which I think has changed, but the first submission was immense. It seemed to me that it was, as we say, over-designed. And in fact, I think the whole site is much bigger than it really needs to be for the Eisenhower Memorial. That's another issue. That's a fait accompli. I can't change that. I think it's 4 acres, and probably they should have cut that by a third and then used the rest of the site for something else. In any event, that's another risk one runs, is doing something that doesn't work or is inappropriate in the cityscape.
Well, before I give Ala this other mic, I'd like to just ask a question. Does the size of the land available, I mean, obviously it makes a difference if you've got 4 acres versus a little triangle, but could you bring that into as we move along, could you bring that into the discussion about, the amount of space you have to work with?
Sure. I mean, from a designer's, from my point of view as a designer, yes, the site is very consequential, very important. And not just the size, but its orientation and what's going on around it and what's across the street. I mean, all of those are things that good architects and urban designers take into consideration. So that would be an issue.
So we have on the screen images from submissions that are finalists. And so I'm just going to go through these images with you. If you read the article, you know that the plot of land designated is right near Union Station. Here, let me go back up again to the spot. It's right below Union Station down Mass Avenue across from the Dubliner and the Post Office Museum. And of course, that's a very busy, high-traffic area in terms of people visiting Washington because they're visiting the Capitol, they're crossing the Capitol Hill grounds, they are visiting the National Postal Museum, and everything in and around is abuzz with activity. You have Union Station itself, and that building, if you don't know, that is in the background is a bank building, and it is not part of the land allotment, and it is not part of the design. And so here is the maquette and design. And we can go through these one by one, but some are very abstract with no narrative in them, and some have both. And in my view, I believe I can say this, I don't believe every single artist had the benefit of a site survey and the ability to really look at and feel the site and design to the site itself. And I think that was a great disadvantage for those artists. And if they didn't feel disadvantaged, then it's just my opinion that it was a very important element of consideration, because as Roger just mentioned, the space itself, the articulation of the space is a very important part of the design element of it.
There's one other thing that goes along with that. We architects like to have two things. We like to have a very good understanding of the site, but we also like to have what we call the program or brief very well defined. So there is a programmatic dimension to designing commemoratives. Programmatic meaning what actually do you want to do? What are the functions or the activities? So for example, some of these images, when you look at them, these look primarily, or some of them look primarily like a platform in which a work of art is being displayed, and there's no other functional agenda evident. Whereas, for example, the Peace Corps commemorative that we're contemplating, which is, by the way, on a triangle where we think we're going to have a triangle that's maybe this size, maybe a little bigger, one of the first things that we've discussed is the fact that there will be activities, programmed events where we might have 200 or 300 people. Well, right away, as soon as you talk about convening a group of people, that's a function, that's an activity. You want to know that. So in fact, if they're going to be, if the notion is that people would come here, that you might want to have some kind of event sometime and have 200 people here, that could greatly influence how you design it, where you put objects or don't. Yeah, well, I think everyone can see this. This is a whole. This is kind of an experiential landscape that she's designed, and I think whereas the others are, as you just pointed out, are basically sculptures or objects that you could place. Well, this one, I guess.
Called shooting hands.
Yeah.
A pair of bronze hands that dominate the whole composition, but you can see that there are other elements in the design.
Yeah,
itself.
Yeah. And I gather those are some the pictographs or some kind of images on panels set in low stone walls. Is that what I? That's the only image I've seen. I don't know. It seems very episodic. You know, it seems like the elements don't really add up to anything. It's the whole is not greater than the sum of the parts, if you want my opinion. I also think the sort of the hands metaphor is probably one of the more overused. I mean, that's really a cliche, frankly. And the broken sphere, of course, we understand that. That's a very abstract notion. I don't know. I suppose you could. This doesn't do much for me. But again, because it could mean so much, and it could be absolutely anywhere. I do think, I will say, I think it's important that this, whatever is done here, really be designed for this place. For this place. Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. I mean, that's. I'd love to know why they selected it. It seems.
Well, it represents a ritual cloth.
Yeah, that is familiar to Ukrainians.
Oh, really? So that's a cloth.
It's a cloth. It's meant to represent a cloth, a rushnik, which is, you know, an aeons-old ritual object in Ukraine.